Hello, it's ChewDog Charts. In the previous video, we discussed what Warren Buffett through Berkshire Hathaway bought through his most recent 13F filing with the SEC. Today, we're going to take a look at one stock that Warren Buffett through Berkshire Hathaway sold. And we're also going to do a bit of comparison and talk about George Soros. So let's take a look. To do a recap on the previous video, we talked about some of the purchases that Berkshire Hathaway made, which included Bank of America, Apple, Synchrony Financial, and Monsanto. But as part of the 13F filing, Berkshire Hathaway also sold IBM, Wells Fargo, Charter Communications, and Wabco Holdings. The 13F also showed that some of the top holdings included Wells Fargo, Kraft, Apple, Coca-Cola, and Bank of America. Now, moving the chart down, we can see here in the color portion the various holdings. Disclosure here for me, I am partially colorblind, so I'm not going to be able to give you a fair description or representation of this chart. I'll let you take a look at it while I read some of the other additional information. From the 13F activity report, the market value was $177 billion. The prior market value was $162 billion. Purchases was one stock, or actually one company. Additional purchases were three stocks, three companies, sold out of one stock or one company, and reduced holdings in three stocks or three companies. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few other charts. For most of Warren Buffett's investing career, he's shied away from tech companies. However, back in about 2011, Berkshire Hathaway started building a position in IBM. 5 years later, Berkshire Hathaway started to build a position in Apple stock. Now, back in May, Buffett, in an interview with CNBC, stated that I don't value IBM the same way that I did 6 years ago when I started buying. I've revalued it somewhat downward. Now, in this last 13F filing, we find out that the revaluation meant selling off over 17 million shares of IBM, or about 31.5%. So let's take a look at why. This chart here shows that from 2011 to the current time frame, IBM has underperformed the S&P 500. IBM has lost about 8.07%, while during the same time frame, the S&P 500 increased by about 96.68%. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why the position in IBM was reduced. This chart here shows the relative performance of Apple stock versus the S&P 500 since about July 2015. During that period, Apple increased in price by about 60.64%, whereas the S&P 500 increased by about 25.7%. The 25.7% is not a shabby increase, but we can see that Apple more than doubled that. An interesting note to the story regarding Berkshire's acquisition of additional Apple shares is that in the 13F filing by George Soros for the Soros Fund Management hedge fund, George Soros liquidated his position in Apple. So we have Soros selling and Buffett buying. It's going to be interesting to find out who had the better position. Now, this chart here is a 20-year monthly on IBM, the relative performance of IBM versus the S&P 500, where the S&P by the ETF SPY, the spiders, is in the black, whereas IBM is the red. And we see that IBM actually did fairly well in the 2008-2009 crisis from this point here to this point here, perhaps outperforming the S&P 500, which bottomed here. However, subsequently, the S&P 500 has done much better. Recently, in the last couple of years, IBM has underperformed. So let's go reset this chart. Okay, this is the reset chart on IBM intraday on November 16th, 2017. We have a current price of $149.40. And as we just showed, the bottom in 2008, 2009 was here, and IBM moved up to probably about $215 to $220 per share, had the decline here into early 2016, a subsequent rise up to this point here in early 2017 before another slight consolidation. We find that we're still above the 200 EMA, but we're wrestling with the 20 and the 50 EMA. If we move on down to the MACD, the MACD has shown a interim high here and an attempt at a bottom at this point here. Not quite sure, but we do see a very minor attempt to move up on the fast line, but an unsuccessful attempt and a reflection back. Moving down into the MAC histogram, we see that again here we have the possible attempt to bottom. We're near the zero line. We're not too far off, so it doesn't look too negative in my opinion. Moving through to the momentum indicator shows much the same. It's hugging the zero line, and that's fair performance. But of course, compared to the S&P, it's underperformed as we've seen. The RSI is a moderate 44.17, again attempting to ride near the midline, the 50, with the interim bottom here, and then maybe just a slight downward move in the last month or so. We see here in the stochastics that the stochastics has stayed above the 20 line level. If it had gone below, that would be considered perhaps oversold territory, but it's still here above 20. Maybe a little bit of sawtoothing that may take this sideways. Here we've seen a relative volatile sawtoothing in this period here, in that range there, but a less volatile period in 2005 into 2006. So I'm expecting something like this here going forward into 2018. Moving on down, the volume looks fairly steady over the last several years, and the Williams bottomed out here, moved up beyond the so-called oversold territory of negative 80 to negative 100. We're here probably about a negative 70, 76.48 right there. So we move back up to the price chart. What the oscillators are telling me is that a little bit of a battle going on with an attempt to bottom here. I would expect perhaps some sideways trading until some of those oscillators move through, such as in the MACD, before the MACD fast line moves through the trigger line. I think we're going to go sideways. But once the fast line does move through the trigger line, keep an eye out, because we're near zero, and that's when stock price performance often improves. However, caveat, please do your fundamental analysis on everything. I am not making any recommendations. I'm just saying that this is perhaps a stock you might want to keep on your radar. However, you don't necessarily want to bet against Warren Buffett, who is selling big portions of his position through Berkshire Hathaway. So for now, that's ChewDog Charts. Thank you.